Hey guys, Bernard here. Thanks for listening to the Way Too Indiecast. We really appreciate it. But before we get on with the show, I have to mention that we made a little error in our conversation about one of the movies we discuss on the episode, Alex Garland's Ex Machina. The movie actually opens wide not this coming Friday, the 17th, which is when it hits San Francisco, but next Friday, the 24th. Our bad. Sorry about that. But nevertheless, it's a wonderful movie that you guys should all check out when it comes to your town, whenever that may be. Now, with that out of the way, enjoy the show. Hey friends, welcome to the Way Too Indiecast, the official podcast of WayTooIndie.com. I'm your host, Bernard Boo, a writer at Way Too Indie, beaming out to you from the Bay Area in sunny California. And joining me on today's show from beautiful Los Angeles, California, is Ananda Dillon, another writer and editor at Way Too Indie. What's up, Ananda?
Not much. How's it going?
Dude, it's beautiful here. We live in the best area of the country there is.
It's beautiful in California. I like that we mention this like every time we talk to each other. Like, hey everyone, all of y'all in New Hampshire, sorry.
Well, our colleagues are always just freezing their fucking asses off when we're talking to them. Like literally freezing. So but today's podcast is a 100% West Coast, actually California exclusive podcast because we've got a special guest rounding out our trio today. He's one of my dearest friends. His name is Ryan Clements. He's a very popular figure in the video games industry. He was formerly of IGN and host of one of the most popular video game podcasts of all time, Podcast Beyond. And he's still in the games industry as a very popular figure. And,
at an undisclosed location.
He does still doing really very cool stuff. He's doing really well for himself. Proud of him. He's coming to us from Oakland, California, just a few miles from where I am, actually. Ryan Clements, thank you for joining us today.
Dude, thank you so much for having me. It is such a pleasure to hear your formal podcast host voice.
I typically sound like a much more dickish than this.
No, it's perfect. I love it. This is a new side of Bernard that I'm getting right now.
Oh yeah, he goes into the mode.
Yeah, that was beautiful. I like how it's beautiful, best part of the country, southern or sunny California, also bordering on post-apocalyptic wasteland currently.
Yeah,
yes,
with the drought.
Yeah,
that's true.
Important to remind our listeners.
Well, true. We're kind of a deluded state. We are comfortable in our state of delusion.
We're living in a fantasy for sure.
Well, again, thank you guys for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Oh, the pleasure is all ours. And I haven't done a show with you in a while, Ananda, so I'm excited for that as well.
I know. We keep missing each other.
Which doesn't make sense because this works so much better with the time zones.
Yes, it does.
It's much easier to schedule.
That's true.
Yeah,
maybe they just can't handle that much California in the house usually, but we're just going to show them it can be great.
Yeah, it's all sunshine today. But we've got a really nerd-tastic show for you guys today. It's super nerdy. First up, our main subject is something that's kind of been a thorn in my side for the better part of my life, which is anime. It's the eminently popular form of Japanese animation. I'm sure you guys have all heard of at least, that's captured the imaginations of millions across the world. But for some reason, I could just never bring myself to enjoy it or even approach it until very recently. So we're going to talk about that. And Ryan, of course, is pretty knowledgeable about the subject, so he's kind of going to be our guide into the world of anime. I know Ananda is also kind of a very low familiarity with anime, right, Ananda?
I think so. I think you're going to help me realize how much I do or do not know about anime, actually, which will be good for me.
Come with me on this magical journey.
Yes. Wonderful.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. I am committed to finding out what I'm missing, what I'm missing about anime, and hopefully in today's discussion, Ryan can gift me with the key to anime ecstasy. I wrote that down, by the way. I didn't.
Wow. That is really, really going to be tough for me to live up to.
It'll be hot.
Such a wordsmith. Oh.
Expectations.
Oh, that was terrible. But in our second segment, Ryan is going to say goodbye, and Ananda and I are going to be left to review Alex Garland's riveting mini sci-fi opus Ex Machina, starring Alicia Vikander, Oscar Isaac, and Domhnall Gleeson. That's coming. That is out now, right?
It's out now.
It's out Friday. And it's opening wide this coming Friday, I think. to more theaters expanding. And really excited for that conversation because it might be my favorite movie of the year so far. We'll see. It Follows is on the throne at the moment. David Robert Mitchell's micro-budget horror movie that we talked about a couple weeks ago. But I think it might just be dethroned. We'll see. We'll talk about that in our second main segment. But for now, before we reach our full force nerdgasm,
Goodness gracious.
we are going to give you a little foreplay action. How about that?
Oh my
Wow.
gosh, Bernard. I don't know, man.
I don't know.
Getting racy.
Yeah, we're getting a little
Just
soft.
like anime.
I'm just blushing. I'm just red in the cheeks.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, as with every show, we're gonna kick things off with our indie picks for the week. So this is our segment where each of your hosts, excluding Ryan today because he's a guest and he's from a different industry, of course, so we wouldn't expect him to have an indie pick for us. But Ananda and I are gonna give you some of our favorite recent indie movies that we think are worth checking out. So let's let you start, Ananda. What have you been watching?
I had a little bit of trouble. I've been watching a lot of TV lately, which is awesome. As Way Too Indie is officially on the TV bandwagon.
Yeah.
But also I've been watching a lot of bad indie, so then it's hard to really recommend a whole lot of it to you guys. But I'm gonna second what others have said in the last few weeks. I definitely recommend It Follows if it's playing in your town. Go see it. And then obviously Ex Machina when it goes wide, and we'll talk about why later. But I also wanted to kind of give a little shout out to a film coming out this Friday called True Story. And I will preface to say I'm not 1,000% recommending it, but it is very intriguing and worth a see. I think if you've got nothing better to watch, I guess. what a combination. But so basically, True Story is directed by Rupert Gould, who you do not know because he has not directed anything else, unless you're really into London Shakespearean theater, which he has directed. But True Story is starring James Franco, Jonah Hill, Felicity Jones, all great people, awesome, who it's kind of a story within a story within a story in the sense that this is a movie based on a book based on the true story of a journalist's interaction with a murderer who used his identity. So the whole story is that Mike Finkel, True, is an actual journalist who used to write for the New York Times until he was fired for embellishing the truth on an article. And after he was fired, he kind of goes through this like spiral of depression and things. And he ends up finding out from another sort of local reporter that there's this murderer who has claimed his identity, who used his name when he was caught by the cops. And the reporter is asking him, why do you think he did this? And he has no idea. He never heard of this. So he decides to kind of look into this and starts meeting with this murderer, which in the movie is played by James Franco. Jonah Hill plays Mike Finkel, and starts to sort of form a weird sort of friendship with him. It's a little in cold-bloodish, though less emotional between the two of them. But it's interesting to me. This is why I'm recommending this movie, is that I think it's fascinating in a sort of a larger cultural way, in like this phenomenon of what I kind of like in my head dub like Instagram styled entertainment, which if you're on Instagram, it's like presenting a version of yourself or world like real life, but it's filtered to look like more cool or interesting or beautiful. We all do it, you know.
Oh yeah.
Exactly. So it's kind of like that, and it feels a little bit like a lot of other things I've seen like that have been coming out, like The Jinx on HBO or the podcast Serial, which are all obviously based in reality. These are true stories, but it's entertainment, so it's presented in a very specific way to you, and this feels like that, in that it's reality. This actually happened, but ultimately it is entertainment, so it's kind of interesting to have it presented like that. I will say Felicity Jones completely threatens to steal the entire show, because like she's she's amazing, and like there's one scene where she just is fantastic. And it's like this whole movie was maybe even more worthwhile because of this one scene with her that's really good. So I think Gould, as a new director, is probably still honing his pacing and like visual parts of filmmaking. But it makes sense that he'd be drawn to this kind of a story. It's got some real like Shakespearean themes in the sense of like self-destruction and things like that. So definitely interesting. You're not quite sure where it goes the whole time, so it does keep you interested. I'm not sure the payoff is really all that great, but still a definite interesting one. That's True Story, and it comes out this Friday.
All right. Well, if I have nothing better to do, then I'll watch True Story.
Okay. Or catch it on Netflix or, VOD, like total VOD, like worthy. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I'm actually intrigued by that. I'd love to see, it's just always interesting to see comedic actors kind of stretch out a little bit. That's True Story. You got to check that out. Coming out in theaters this coming Friday. But my indie pick for this week is James D. Cooper's documentary, Rock Doc, Lambert and Stamp. It's about two aspiring filmmakers in London back in the 60s. One was Kit Lambert, this posh guy with a fancy sort of BBC broadcaster accent, and Chris Stamp, who was his buddy who came from a more working class background, so he's a little more rough around the edges. These were two young guys who worked at a movie studio and loved like Godard and Truffaut and were big fans of the French New Wave. So they thought that they'd make a film of their own, and they thought they'd make a documentary about a rock band. So they went out to find a rock band to make a movie about. And this one night they stumbled into a pub and found this group of sort of unattractive looking guys playing music on stage, and they thought, oh, these guys will do. They became friends with them. The band was called the High Numbers. And but the movie never happened. They started filming some stuff, but it never got finished. And Lambert and Stamp actually became the band's managers for years. And later on, the band became one of the biggest bands in rock and roll history. And we better know them now as The Who. So these two guys, inadvertently, as wanting to make a film, just discovered one of the greatest bands of all time. It's a great rock doc. It's kind of visceral, emotional, surprisingly tender rock doc that uses archival footage from when Lambert and Stamp were trying to make their film, but it kind of repurposes it. They also have interviews with Chris Stamp. Kit Lambert died in the 80s, so they weren't able to get interviews with him. Chris Lambert died in 2012, too, so they're both gone, but Stamp was there for a lot of the production of the film. Roger Daltrey and Pete Townsend of The Who are also interviewed. And what's really cool about the movie I found was that the editor, Chris Tellefson, he kind of takes these archival clips and manipulates them and edits them in a way that makes them feel really immediate and not like when you watch rock docs, when you see old archival clips, it kind of feels like you're reflecting and looking back to a time long gone. The way Chris Tellefson edits his stuff, it seems like you're there. And it makes you jealous that you weren't there at the time. So it's cool stuff. And I think it's similar to the way kind of how Kanye West breathes life into vintage song samples through his manipulation and just makes it sound completely different. So yeah, it's a great rock documentary. I highly recommend it. I'm sure it'll end up on Netflix someday, but it's in theaters and limited release right now.
So many rock docs lately, right? Wrecking Crew is also real big right now, and
Wrecking Crew's good too.
Yeah, it's getting lots of love. Yeah.
You gonna check those out, Ryan?
Absolutely. I really wanted to interrupt you right at the end after you mentioned Kanye West and said that I was happy for you, but I decided against it. I didn't know how played out that joke was on this show.
Not as much as it should be.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we start that up.
Yeah.
But those are our indie picks. Just a short 2 picks for this week, but that's okay because we've got some really great conversations for you guys today. We're heading into our first discussion right now, which is about anime. This is anime, which is, of course, like we mentioned, the Japanese form of animation that's kind of been bane of my existence for a lot of my life.
We're starting off on the right foot.
Yeah, no, this is where I'm coming from. I wanted to talk about this because I'm committed to I've kind of spent my whole life trying to do that. Whenever I don't like something like country music, I just commit myself to seeing what I'm missing and kind of just studying it and trying to see why these people love this shit. Because like millions of people love country music. I can't, they're not idiots. So I went out and I listened to country music, and now it's like one of my favorite genres.
I think that's such a great attitude, by the way, that an attitude of trying to understand something that you don't initially like, as opposed to the sort of culture of cynicism and dismissal that a lot of popular media has nowadays. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, yeah, and it's a selfish thing too. It's like I just want it's for me, kind of.
Well, sure, but still, you're still expanding your horizons and educating yourself about different art forms, and I think that's awesome, man.
Well, thank you, man.
You're very welcome. Well, that's the end of the show.
That's it.
I'm glad we solved this. And
let's sing
I'll
the
see you
Barney
guys
theme
next time.
song and end it. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like anime, I think now's a good time to talk about anime because right now we're in the midst of this kind of big comic book movie explosion at the movie theaters that has us inundated with like countless superhero movies coming out and superhero TV shows too. But I think it's a safe bet to say that the next big bang will be anime adaptations. I think the pool of anime stories to cull from for Hollywood is almost bottomless. And I think they're going to make a lot of money off this stuff, and we're already starting to see some traction there with Sony picking up the rights to make Robotech as a movie franchise, that's going to make them like buttloads of money, I'm sure. And then the Akira movie, which has kind of been going through some production hell or pre-production hell, but it'll inevitably come, I think. Joseph Gordon-Levitt was originally attached to that, but we'll see who eventually ends up playing the main role in that movie. But anyways, I think anime is going to have a serious presence at the movie theater. So now I have to reckon with the fact that I can't do it, man. Like I can't.
I was gonna start the show by asking. I like didn't know if I was allowed to swear or not, and I was quickly educated on your policy on vulgarities.
We are considered an explicit podcast.
That's perfect. Although I'll still guard myself for safety reasons. But so Bernard, I want to start real quick by saying I obviously, as your friend, I know your position on this. We've had plenty of discussions and conversations about it. But Ananda, if you don't mind telling me a little bit about your either experience or inexperience with the art form, it would be really interesting to me.
Absolutely. So I think one of the earliest memories I have of being exposed to anime is late night MTV as a child, where Aeon Flux would come on. And the opening credits alone creeped the shit out of me to the point where, like,
as they are wont to do.
Yes. And so I wasn't super into that, and that was immediately kind of a turnoff for me.
I wasn't super into being traumatized as a child.
Exactly. And then, like, over the years, seeing other sort of versions of anime, and I know it's such an all-encompassing term. I know it literally just means like animation, and I know it's come to mean sort of Japanese influenced animation, right, or Japanese style. So, which you could totally school me on later how wrong I am about that. But so I tend to not always know the difference if I'm seeing true Japanese anime or if I'm watching westernized versions of anime. But I do know that things that have freaked me out that were in the anime style are, like, for instance, that section of Kill Bill Part 1 that's like the childhood of O-Ren Ishii.
Yes.
Do you guys remember that scene?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so I could hardly watch that. Like, I think the first time I watched the movie, I kept my eyes closed for most of that scene. There is something about watching that kind of gore, for instance. I know not all anime is gory, but like played out in that way, that sort of slow moving and too many lines happening on the screen, and I don't know. And then, of course, there's all like your Yu-Gi-Ohs and Pokemons and Dragon Ball Zs where, like, eyeballs are wavering and mouths are curdling, and I don't understand it.
So we're in the same boat.
Yeah, so there's that weirdness. But I started to really think about this and, like, is there any anime that I have seen that I think maybe I actually liked, and is it actually anime? I don't know. And so I'm thinking, okay, I love Legend of Korra, right? The Nickelodeon show. And I don't know if that really counts because that's clearly an American-made TV show, but it's definitely in that style. And that one doesn't freak me out. I love that show. I can watch it all day. My brother loves anime, so he's forced me to watch, like, Full Metal Alchemist. And I love that show.
I like that show.
The original
like
or
show.
Brotherhood? Do you know off the top of your head?
I think it's the original. Brotherhood
Okay.
doesn't sound familiar to me.
I'm actually not super familiar with that series, but it is tremendously popular, as I'm sure you know, and I'm sure your brother mentioned. And they kind of did like a remake series after the original series, and I know that a lot of people highly praise that because it's a little more true to the source material.
And then I remember watching the Animatrix too, and I didn't I guess
Okay.
I can stand some of it. I'm not completely open, or I mean closed off to it. So,
No, absolutely. And
and then there's
that
things like Hayao Miyazaki. Like,
Right.
where does that fall on the spectrum? I don't know. So, answer all my questions.
Okay. So please answer all these questions.
Yes.
Well, first of all, well, yeah, that's great to know. We could also spend like the next 10 shows talking about how much I love Legend of Korra and the Avatar series. So, but I know that's not quite the time and place for that. Love
I
it
could go
though.
into it with you though.
We'll have time.
Yeah.
We'll have time.
Yeah, we'll
We'll make time later.
Big time.
let's just book the next 12 hours and here we go.
Cool.
Uh,
Okay.
So I think, well, I do want to start, if you guys don't mind, with a very quick disclaimer.
Sure.
It may come as a shock to your listeners and to you guys, but I'm not Japanese. So I would like to make the disclaimer that my experience with anime is coming from an enthusiast, a Western enthusiast perspective, which I think is going to be very different from someone that either grew up in the country or can speak Japanese and so can watch it with a little more understanding of the, language jokes and little in-jokes and culture references. So it's a really different experience to be a Western viewer of anime than it is, I think, a native Japanese viewer of anime. But with that said, obviously, I grew up with the art form and I've been watching it since I was a kid. And it's something that I'm really very sentimentally attached to. I've studied Japanese martial arts for over a decade and read a lot of Japanese poetry. And so, I mean, a lot of things that I think a lot of people that are from the West that kind of have an infatuation with that culture might also gravitate towards. So I'm sure some of your listeners will probably also have a similar background as well. That's my little disclaimer. I hope that was okay.
Yeah.
No, that's good. I mean, yeah, I think I have a similar. I'm pretty much in the same boat with you, Ananda, as far as anime goes. I would add that I am Asian, and,
No. Oh my God, I never knew.
But yeah, like growing up, it was interesting. As a kid growing up, I was never into really Asian things. I don't know. I was just considered myself American. I know that's like a crazy concept, but I grew up here and had never left the country, and I was never exposed to anime. So growing up, I was actually kind of bullied and excluded by the other Asian kids, and even some white kids for not liking anime because I was Asian. So I also have I think that's like a subconscious distaste for it that I developed because it's almost like people expect me to love it. So I'm like, no, fuck you. Like I don't have to like it. I don't have to like anything.
Yeah.
But I think
totally
mostly. But then I got over that because that's silly. Like that's a silly reason not to be interested in anime. But I think as I grew older, what really repelled me from it. When I started out this journey a few years ago with you, Ryan, actually, where I made a concerted effort to watch anime because I was doing the country music thing. It's like so many people like this. I'm sure there's something I'm missing that I have to just kind of acquire this taste for. So I started watching some, and the thing that I found problematic for me was that it was so theatrical and melodramatic and kind of exaggerated. Everything was exaggerated. The people didn't seem to talk like people to me. That the emotions were exaggerated, and so while I do enjoy that. I found that I couldn't find a movie or an anime where the characters behaved like fucking real people. They just always looked like, they always look crazy.
They make so many noises.
just like me, and that's why I love it. Make a lot of different weird noises.
Yeah,
I think,
much sighing and whining.
And so this is a great point, and this is actually one of the things I wanted to start with. So thank you for the perfect segue.
You bet.
I think that one thing to consider is that, like any art form, anime is highly representative and influenced by its native culture. So I think someone that's approaching it as an American, for example, and as you said, you identify as an American, seeing that it's like peering into a different culture, and especially when you're watching maybe something that's translated, and so they're speaking in English, but their speech patterns and their mannerisms and the way that they gesticulate, all of it is so different because the Japanese are so different from Westerners. In terms of their culture. And I think that that's actually one of the initial barriers that a lot of people that don't have a lot of exposure to the art form face, is this barrier of just a different culture and just having to learn and understand it and kind of get why the way that they speak and the way that they interact with each other is as you said, so different than the way that we do
But
in,
there's a
the
difference
United
though,
States.
because I've seen Japanese movies, like live action movies. I've watched those my whole life, and
Uh-huh.
they don't talk like that. Like they,
I don't know.
they don't like fucking like jump up 10 feet in the air and like like
Sure.
scream.
So that's the second point that I think it's important to make is that anime can mean so many different things, and I think
Mm,
Ananda kind of hit this on the head earlier. And it's such a massive, tremendous umbrella, and it just like it, saying, oh, indie film. That can mean
Mm.
so many different
right,
things
right.
too. So a lot of anime just might not, that just might be something that you're not interested in, which is totally fine. And I think that there's always, though, going to be something out there for everybody, and it's just a matter of
You have to
finding.
find it.
You
Yeah,
have
I
to
just
find
haven't
the
found it.
kind.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like there's a lot of anime that, as you said, it's like kind of how our cartoons are. It's very cartoony, it's very exaggerated. Characters emote in such a way that's really unrealistic, but there's also anime that's much more grounded in reality, and it kind of reflects much more how maybe like a Japanese person might actually speak or animate in real life. So that's definitely, I think, one thing to keep in mind as well. I don't want to keep ranting, by the way, if you guys want to interject at any point.
No, I
I
think
just,
that's fair. I
Good
believe you
stuff.
too. Like that's why I loved having this love having this conversations because I really need to unlock what I this fucking door. I've been working on this. I just for all the listeners and you Ananda, I years ago, like maybe 3-4 years ago, I said I started this embarked on this journey to kind of get used to anime and kind of start to appreciate it. And I went over to Ryan's place and had him show me. Oh God, I can't pronounce it.
just try, just try,
No, I can't. Okay.
just do it.
Evangelion?
So close. Yeah, pretty much right. Evangelion.
Evangelion?
Yeah,
Damn it.
Evangelion.
Evangelion. Okay, so yeah, and I watched that and I like that. Yeah, I
Yeah.
like that.
So there's so many different anime. My experience, even as an enthusiast, is so limited. I mean, there's so many things that I probably haven't seen and I haven't been
Right.
exposed to. So I really like to make it clear when I'm talking to people about my passions, also about my own limitations as a viewer. But yeah, I'm sure that there's a lot of anime that's maybe, if I may, not so great. And I'll just try and stay positive and leave it at that. But there's also some anime that I think are some of the greatest creative endeavors that I've ever experienced
Mm,
across, music and literature and film. I mean, there's just some things that resound so deeply within me that I really feel like I wish more people had exposure. And a lot of those, of course, are reflective of me growing up with them. So, like you said, Neon Genesis Evangelion was one of my oldest and most favorite series, and it's had a very, very complicated history, which we don't have to go into now. But Ananda, have you ever heard of that? Has your brother ever mentioned it?
I have no idea what that is. No.
Yeah, it's a classic anime series of the, I want to say of the 90s. I'm terrible at dates, by the way, so everyone
That's
can just
okay.
look it up on Wikipedia if you want to confirm things. Actually, I have Wikipedia open, so I can be doing
it's
that
like
while we
from the
chat.
20s.
Yeah. I'm
Oh
like, oh, it,
gosh.
it, it actually came out last year. My mistake. Um, no, yeah, it was from the mid 90s. I'm seeing 95 on
95.
the wiki
Hmm.
entry. So if we can all trust wiki, we can proceed. But this is a famous anime because it introduced a lot of concepts which then started to echo throughout the industry
Mm,
pretty much ever afterwards, including the sort of trope of having characters that are deeply broken and have deep psychological issues. These flawed heroes that we get a lot in media now, I think, but back then, Evangelion really pushed it and really it was a very daring project. But the premise being that it's this sort of post-apocalypse world. Humanity has been mostly wiped out, and now there's pockets of humanity still remaining, and they use this very powerful and kind of absurd technology of giant robots to fight these what they call angels, which keep appearing and
Hmm.
just wreaking havoc on the cities that are left on the planet. And through story reasons, which I will not go into, you have these giant robots can only be piloted by young kids. So these 14-year-old teenagers have to basically enter into really really distressing combat to protect their cities. So you
Like
have this really interesting premise. Sorry, Ananda.
Pacific Rim style, like. Like
So actually,
giant robots.
exactly, and actually
Oh.
Pacific Rim was deeply inspired by Evangelion and other, as they say, mecha anime, which of course the Japanese culture I think has this fascination with the grandiose technology and having these huge towering mechs, is a really really popular kind of subgenre of anime. Anyway, that's a short little synopsis. So if people have never heard of Evangelion, the original run was a 26 episode series, which you can easily find on DVD now, and it's strongly recommended. But it's a very disturbing series, and the first episode is deceptive because you think that you're just going to get it's like part comedy, part action movie, and then it really starts going downhill. It really gets messed up.
Into graphicness or what?
It
Scary?
is
What is it?
graphic. It's psychologically disturbing. Imagine, like, as an example, when piloting these giant, they're called Evangelions, these giant Evas, these children basically feel and reflect whatever pain their machine is experiencing in combat. So if their arm gets ripped off in combat, they experience these sensations in combat, because they're neurologically connected to the robot in order to move it. And so you get a lot of layers, and it's so fantastic. It's so rich. You get so many little layers about not only from a character development perspective, but even these little tiny touches. And Evangelion is an example of, I think, what anime sorely lacks. And I will say this is one of my primary criticisms, especially with modern anime, is that they severely lack subtlety. And subtlety is something that I think a lot of classic anime employ with extreme expertise, because they don't have to explain everything to you, and I think that's what anime does an awful lot of, unfortunately, is that they have these huge monologues to try and explain everything that's going on. When a show like Evangelion or a show like Cowboy Bebop, they really assume that their viewer is highly intelligent and they will figure it out, and you have to rewatch things and try and better understand it. And you could watch the entire series and then go back, watch it again, and get something totally different. So I think that that's one of probably the strong points of some of these classic series, are a sort of a trust in the viewer to really figure things out on their own.
They're cinematic too, like Bebop. I've seen Bebop as well.
Yeah.
And I like that one. And it uses visual storytelling more than most anime. Like you said, it's very common to see just a character just spew exposition.
I know.
Like in the middle
so
of a fight scene, like while they're fighting somebody, they will be talking about philosophy. Like it's so theatrical that it kind of throws me out of it.
Yeah, actually, I'm gonna completely backtrack on myself and say that one of the best things I forgot. Oh no, we weren't talking about this, but Bernard, I just saw Ip Man, that kung fu movie. Did you ever see that?
Oh, Ip Man, yeah. I haven't.
And it just made. Oh yeah, no, never. I just saw it recently, and it reminded me of how much I love the kung fu films. Do such a great job of building up their action scenes and kind of creating these ballet-like dialogues where the two fighters are, discussing, like, leading right up to the fight. I don't know. I just get such a kick out of it.
Well, it's cool because it's storytelling with your body, like it's really fascinating to me. Like I know I on this podcast we've been talking about, I just went to WrestleMania the other week. I just had my dream come true. But I think that's what I love about wrestling, even though it's like so silly, is that it's storytelling with the whole body, wordless. It's just like dancing.
And that's what martial arts is.
Right, yeah. Like kung fu films do the same thing. I think actors who act with their body, like Jason Statham, he doesn't get enough credit for how good of an actor is, because he's not he's an okay actor with his face and voice, but with his body, he's amazing. Like he's a great actor.
Yeah.
But people only pay attention to when someone's talking or like, having a face-to-face conversation.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. But anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent, my kung fu tangent.
Dude, I'm totally on board with kung fu. That we can get into.
Perfect.
So.
But yeah, I think that if you two or your listeners are having trouble with anime, it's really all about getting a good recommendation to start with. I think if you really want to better understand the art form, you need to watch what some of the best the art form has to offer. I think
there's some other ones.
So let me talk about some of the ones that I grew up with and really loved. I mean, you have Evangelion, which we already talked about. Trigun is a more modern example and is pretty well loved as being a sort of comedy western that, similar to Evangelion, takes a very dark turn later in the series. And if you know Lord of the Rings fans, there was a classic fantasy anime that came out a long time ago called Record of Lodoss War, and it was this beautiful fantasy, short fantasy series, which I also really loved. Absolutely astounding art in that one. Maybe not the most mature storytelling, but it was still really fun. And I think probably one of the best examples I can give of an anime that respects its viewer to the point of assuming that you're a genius to try and understand everything because it's really hard to follow. And I think one that I've talked to Bernard about before is called The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya.
Whoa.
And I think it's probably whoa. It's probably one of my favorite anime of all time. It really rivals Evangelion because it's really special to me. But it was, I just think, one of the most brilliant pieces of media ever made. When it was originally broadcast in Japan, on the outside it looks, on its skin, the skin deep view of it is that it's a high school drama and a comedy. And that's the most shallow way I could describe it. Because when it was originally broadcast in Japan, it was broadcast entirely out of order. All the episodes are achronological, and the story works both when you view it achronologically. You still get a character development arc out of all the heroes in the story. You can also reassemble the entire series chronologically, and it just gives you a different understanding of all those characters. That alone, I thought, would have been worthy of immense praise to have a team put together a piece of art like that. Something that works, storytelling works both chronologically and achronologically, but it goes way deeper than that. And so I would strongly recommend. Well, the problem is that the American translation I wasn't super happy with. But if you find a way to maybe download a fan sub or something, I'm not condoning piracy. Please understand. But let's just say you buy it and
please
then also
understand.
Please understand. But if you, was that an Iwata
Nintendo
joke?
Yeah.
But anyway, strongly recommended because it is such a touching kind of slice of life. You get to see sort of a Japanese high schooler's experience in extraordinary circumstance, and it's really just a phenomenal series.
Wow. And what was that one called again?
The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya.
All right.
And it really, I'll just say this. It asks the question, as crazy as it sounds, it asks the question, what if a supreme deity, what if the focal point of the entire universe was essentially represented as a single high school girl and she had absolutely no idea? And that is really what the series is all about. And it is actually narrated from the perspective of one of her classmates who gets pulled into these extraordinary circumstances because you're basically dealing with a what if God was completely unawares that he or she was God and was living on Earth. Really, really fascinating stuff.
I was just going to ask, it seems like all the ones you're mentioning, is anime typically a TV series? Is it usually in TV form?
Well, I would say often. I don't know if usually is the best word for it, but I think that a lot of the time what I see happen is, unless it's a studio that specializes in just theatrical releases, it's very common for you to see a manga, so basically a Japanese comic book, gain popularity, and then a studio will pick it up and adapt it into either a short or regular length series, which can be anywhere from 13 to 26 episodes. And then if there's success there, sometimes you'll see movie adaptations as well. My experience is mostly with those TV series. I really like getting a slightly longer look into a fictional world and not quite in the sort of snapshot that you get with a film. But then, of course, you have some famous anime like One Piece or Naruto or what have you that are hundreds and hundreds of episodes long.
Yeah.
And unless you're a goddamn Greek Odyssey of some kind, I think that really makes it it's a difficult thing to keep a good story for that long. And I actually have kind of my own qualms with super elongated series like that. But that's my personal preference. Naruto and One Piece are really well loved too. So.
Well, I gotta reveal to you guys that this has been a few years that I've been trying out anime. It hasn't been clicking with me. Like I've been trying, giving it an earnest shot.
Sure.
And I actually just in preparation for this episode.
Oh my!
I think I just watched the first anime that I would consider like in the top of like any movies I've seen. Like it really great.
Yes. You told me, you mentioned this the other night.
I know. I told you I was gonna watch it.
What'd you watch?
I watched Grave of the Fireflies. Grave of the Fireflies, the 1998 film directed by Isao Takahata. And it is one of the most beautiful movies I've ever seen. It's about a brother and sister named Setsuko and Seita. I'm so Asian right now. I'm so Asian.
It's fine. You're so close.
But brother and sister living in wartime Japan, and their mom gets killed in an air raid, which leaves them with kind of to fend for themselves. And they stay with their aunt for a while, but their aunt's a bitch, so they leave.
Jeez.
And then they end up like in an abandoned shelter, and they don't know where their father is. Their father's out fighting the war. And it's about these siblings trying to survive and, stay alive and love each other. And it's one of the most heart-wrenching, dramatic, tasteful movies. People sounded like fucking people, and they moved like the animation wasn't. The animation was fucking gorgeous. There's little touches like the two siblings. It's an older brother and a really young sister, and they're out playing in a field, and the brother tells the sister to close her eyes. He pulls out a little package of fruit drops, like these candies. And there's this great little animation touch where he tries to pick one of the candies off the wrapper, and it sticks a little bit, and he shakes it off. And I thought that was just such a great little, animation detail that adds so much to the storytelling. You can't even put your finger on why that adds to the story because it's so inconsequential almost. But it really was poetic, these little things they do. And I really think this was one of Roger Ebert's like favorite movies of all time. And I which kind of made me feel like, okay, let's see. But it was amazing.
It's Studio Ghibli, right?
Studio Ghibli.
Yeah. See, I'm way more open-minded to anything that comes out of that studio, because then I'm like, okay, this might actually be okay. I can handle it.
Yeah, they know what they're doing over there.
Yeah, they're a little more user-friendly for me.
And you know what the funny thing is that, and not to interrupt you, Bernard, I'm sorry, but the Studio Ghibli movies are like the ones that I famously either have little interest in or I haven't even seen.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know why. I guess it's just a difference in style and opinion.
So you don't have a strong opinion about Miyazaki?
I mean, I think he's brilliant, and I do really love the films, but they're just a little different. The funny thing to me, and this could probably get me just eviscerated by anime fans. When I think of those movies, I think of them as being more like Western animation films as opposed to anime. Which is funny because obviously they're not, but that's just kind of the impression that I get because my experience with anime is so different. Maybe a more traditional series really plays and looks a lot differently than his films, for better or worse. Probably for the better, that some people would argue, but.
Yeah, when I started, kind of starting to watch anime, I actually purposefully avoided Miyazaki because I'm pretty sure I would love those movies because I heard that they were pretty Western and like kind of approachable for Americans. So I've watched a couple, and I liked them, but I was like, that's not what's gonna get me, to appreciate animes. I kind of looked elsewhere, but I do. Going back to Grave of the Fireflies, I have to say I think it was a breakthrough for me. It was a breakthrough moment for anime for me. It was anyone just watch. It's on YouTube. Like just watch a little bit of that movie and look at how cinematic it is and how tasteful it is and how unadorned the storytelling is. Like there's nothing. Everything means something. Even that little candy animation I was talking about. It's so efficient in the way they tell their story. I recommend that to everybody. That's my extra indie pick for this week. But what do you think, Ananda? Do you think you're going to kind of explore more anime?
Yeah, I think I'd like to. I think Miyazaki's probably has to be a gateway drug for me because I need to start small like that. Right. And I was totally even like not super interested in what he was putting out either. Actually, it's like Spirited Away kind of creeped me out a little bit. Like, not gonna lie, I must be extra sensitive to like that style. I don't even know how to put my finger on exactly what about it weirds me out. And
I think I actually understand though.
do you? Okay, and
Yeah.
I mean, I knew with like shows that I'd seen that what was making me uncomfortable was probably seeing such graphic stuff happening in a cartoon style.
Right.
Like even Beavis and Butthead and Ren and Stimpy always made me slightly uncomfortable because I was so used to seeing a cartoon as
Same.
being so innocent, and
Yeah.
seeing them do things that weren't very innocent was weird to me. It just felt a little bit wrong. And I've come to like appreciate how we can use cartoons for that purpose now, and I'm totally on board. But yeah, so I think now that I've like, then I watched a little more Miyazaki. I loved Howl's Moving Castle, and I think now I'm a little bit more open. Obviously, I'm way okay with all the Western stuff like Legend of Korra and whatever. Vampire Hunter D.
Oh
Have
yeah.
you seen that one? That one I actually like too. It was a little bit creepy, but
It's a
I
little
could get
bit
it.
creepy for sure. Oh man.
Yeah, so that one for
Go
sure. I
from
was like,
Legend of
ooh.
Korra to Vampire Hunter D.
I know, but I liked the story so much that I was like, okay, I think I could sort of watch this. I'm not going to watch these shows all the time. They're never going to be my favorite, but I'm
Hey, you never
definitely
know. You
open.
never know, Ananda.
That's true.
Might surprise you.
That's true. That's true.
So I'll be happy, and I can send it offline, but I can totally send you to some more recommendations.
Oh yeah.
But another one I do want to mention for your listeners, especially if there are folks tuning in that are anime fans already. I've been watching, and I think Bernard, I mentioned this to you already, is Shiro Bako, and this is a fairly new series about making anime. It is about a group of friends who are in a high school anime club together, and when they graduate, they try and get jobs in the industry. So you're following this poor, overworked young girl as she is a production assistant in a struggling anime company, and it's absolutely fantastic.
Wow.
It takes a very realistic and very inside approach to not only living in Japan as a young person, but also working in the industry and seeing all the stuff that goes into making anime. So I'm hesitant to call it meta, but it kind of gives you that sort of inside reflective look at the art form that you're already viewing it in. And I really, really enjoy it. So strongly recommended too.
Yeah, that sounds great. And unfortunately, we have to wrap it up. But this has been awesome. Like, I think this is exactly what I needed. This has been one of the most troublesome. I told you guys that I kind of embark on these journeys on things that I hate to try to learn to love them. And this has been the longest and most arduous one. Anime. I'm still not into it yet, but I think this has been a breakthrough. This has been a great conversation, and I think our listeners, maybe some of you listeners out there, will give some anime a try and join me on my odyssey.
I feel like I didn't do anything, but I was happy to be here.
Oh God, you helped so much.
I didn't know half of what you're talking. I didn't know 75-80% of what you're talking about.
Okay,
So
well, there you go.
I've obviously learned a lot.
And Bernard, I'll keep working on it with you.
Oh yeah, we'll be hanging out and watching more. And I gotta say, before we say goodbye to Ryan, the way we met was Ryan was a writer over at IGN for many years. And I was a fan. Like, I was a fan of all his writing, and I read all his stuff. I listened to his Podcast Beyond, one of my favorites. And I was such a fan, and they were based in San Francisco. I was living in San Francisco, and I went and actually met him at an IGN party, and we became close friends after that. But before we became friends, I was a big fan of yours. So this has been a pleasure to actually do a podcast with you, man.
It's absolutely my pleasure, man. And I'm so happy that you're super into and passionate about something like film criticism, because I have no clue what you're talking about half the time.
I know. I go on these rants, and Ryan has no fucking clue.
No, I love it. I love being exposed to things that I don't know.
Oh, man. But thank you again so much for joining us. And where can we find you on social media?
Oh, man, I actually get to plug myself. I never do this anymore. I am on Twitter at Pwam Cider, PWAM Cider, and that's pretty much where you can find me for random posts about absolute nonsense. That's your go-to destination.
Yeah, and you can also discover the undisclosed location.
Yeah, you could find out where I work there.
Yeah, find out where he works is a mystery that you can unravel on Twitter. But yeah, thanks again, man. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you later.
Yeah, thank you, Bernard, and thank you, Ananda. It was a real pleasure chatting with you, and I hope more to come.
Absolutely. Really awesome talking to you. Thank you so much for all your knowledge.
Thanks. You, man. Now that's going to wrap up our conversation on anime. And now, after the break, we're going to come back and talk about Ex Machina, the new film by Alex Garland, which may be my favorite of the year so far. We'll see. See you on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Way Too Indiecast, the official podcast of waytooindie.com, where you'll find film news, reviews, and interviews with an emphasis on indie. Follow us on Twitter at Way2Indie and like us on Facebook. Hey guys, welcome back. We are back from our conversation about anime. We're about to talk about Ex Machina, the new independent sci-fi film by Alex Garland, but this is actually our second swing at recording this conversation. The first one got lost.
Charm.
Yeah. Second time's the charm. So we're gonna try this again. Ex Machina by Alex Garland. This is one of my favorite movies of the year so far. I really loved it. My review of the movie and my interview with Alex Garland are both going up this week. But for now, we're going to talk about the movie, which follows a computer coder named Caleb, who works at the world's biggest search engine tech company. He's played by Domhnall Gleeson, and you may know him from Frank or Black Mirror. He's a great up-and-coming actor, one of my favorites of the young guys coming up, and he wins a company lottery, Caleb does, to visit the company's genius CEO. His name is Nathan, and he's played by Oscar Isaac, and Caleb's visiting him at his remote compound nestled in some picturesque mountainside somewhere in the world where we don't know because it's a big secret. But when he's dropped off via helicopter at the compound and he meets Nathan, he finds out that what he's really won in the company-wide lottery is an opportunity to participate in an experiment with the world's first true artificial intelligence. She's a robot girl named Ava, played by Alicia Vikander, and this robot girl looks and sounds and feels impossibly human. And I say impossibly because the way that she's designed physically, we can literally see the metal and wires that make up her insides. And that's the setup for the movie, and it makes her one of my favorite, actually, indie sci-fis of all time.
Yeah, I mean, if we have to talk about it twice, thank goodness we're talking about a movie that we both really loved.
Yeah.
So,
of course, we didn't like it. Huh?
I know. So thank goodness for that. But yeah, additionally, I also saw this film a couple weeks ago and I think I told you earlier, I walked out of that theater like, oh my gosh, I finally saw a movie I really liked in 2015.
Found it.
Yeah, where to start about how much I love this movie. I was really impressed with Alex Garland, who hasn't technically directed anything yet, though we're both big fans of his writing. Sunshine, 28 Days Later, Never Let Me Go. That's another really good one. And I felt like this movie felt a lot like those ones, which is just kind of telling about his talent as a writer, that he imbues a certain vibe in his writing, that it comes out in the directing no matter who's at the helm. So I thought that was really impressive that he was able to sort of keep up his own style, and that his own style was already present, because I felt like I already knew it before. It didn't seem like his first film. I felt like I'd seen his movies before. So yeah, this is a really fun movie about a real sexy robot, and not in a, Mars Attacks kind of way or something, but those are aliens. Those aren't robots.
It's not perverted.
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely not it's not perverted, but it is a little sexy sometimes. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also a huge fan of Domhnall Gleeson, and you forgot to mention he was also in About Time, which the ladies will appreciate, because
About Time.
Yeah, it was a really great, fun little romantic movie. But he's such a great contrast with Oscar Isaac, who is phenomenal and is quickly made my favorite actors list as well. Just he's in stinking everything. You ever think about that? If you look at his IMDb page, there's so many movies that you're like, oh yeah, he was in that movie. Oh my God, he's in friggin' everything. He was in that Nativity movie. He was like Joseph. He's the stinking father of Christ. Oh my gosh, this man can play everyone.
And it's cool because he's Jesus. Latino. It's nice to see a Latino actor do so well.
Totally. So they are awesome together. Total opposites, as it should be. I have no idea what either of them is doing in the new Star Wars movie, but this gives me hope that since they'll be together, they'll be just fine, and that movie will be great because of the two of them.
And Brienne of Tarth.
Yes, her too, of course. I mean, there's lots of great people in the Star Wars movie. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, plenty later on this year. I love the pacing of this movie. I loved how thoughtful it is. It's a very dialogue-driven film and not a lot of locations necessarily, though everything you do see is really cool looking.
Yes.
Like, his house is amazing. It's got like crazy walls that light up and like key card access to everything, and it's subtly sci-fi. That's the thing I like about Alex Garland. He seems to be kind of subtly sci-fi. It doesn't hit you over the head with the sci-fi-ness of things. It's aesthetically pleasing. It's kind of believable in that sense, I'd say. It's easier to grasp his vision of the future because it seems so how it might actually end up. Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's the idea of artificial intelligence is like pretty plausible at this point, I think. So it's easy to believe where our technology is at right now. I think it's easy to believe that we could get to this point. But let's get a bit into the plot.
The plot of this movie, Caleb shows up, literally gets dropped off in the middle of a field. He has to sort of wander into Nathan's awesome subterranean house. And he sort of stumbles upon Nathan, who is currently boxing. Very intimidating sort of person.
He's hitting a punching bag.
Yes, he's literally hitting a punching bag. And I said earlier that I thought it was pretty funny if you know anyone in the tech industry or have any sense of how that like work culture is like yes, they're all like essentially geeky, nerdy types that can do all these crazy computer things, but like they're cool. And like Nathan comes out and it's just kind of like, forget that I'm your boss, Caleb. I just want to hang with you for the weekend, you know? But then proceeds to tell him, hey, this is actually why I really brought you here, is that I've created a robot with artificial intelligence and I want you to perform a Turing test on it.
Well, no.
Right?
He says...
Well, yeah. It's sort of a Turing test. It's
not a Turing test. It's the opposite. Because he tells you... The difference is... So he says, have you heard of the Turing test, Caleb? And then Caleb says yes. And he says, a Turing test, if you're familiar, if you've seen The Imitation Game, is a test where you interact with a robot and you try to determine whether the robot can pass as human or not. And here, it's not a Turing test because Nathan is telling Caleb straight out, this is a robot. When he sees the robot, you can, like I said before, you can see her insides. It's clear that this is a robot. What the test is if Ava can convince Caleb that she's human, even though he knows that she's not. So it's an even harder test.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's like the opposite. I'd say it's like Turing test plus like, times 10. It's like the next degree of the Turing test. So Caleb proceeds to test Ava by talking with her.
Well, she's behind glass.
Yes. Well, talking with her in an observatory sort of way. And then it goes back and has a lot of interactions with Nathan in between of his meetings with Ava. And that's where things get kind of interesting, is the way that Nathan, the questions that he chooses and the way his ego kind of comes out and like what's he up to and why has he brought Caleb here really, and like how calculated is this whole test, and things get revealed along the way, but it's interesting and kind of tense, but not in a like thriller sort of way, just in a like what's the real story here.
Yeah, it's a great setup, and I really like the dynamic between Nathan, who is kind of this short, muscly, intellectually imposing guy, and Caleb, who is this lanky nerd who's a little soft-spoken and afraid of Nathan. I think that dynamic is really, really funny and interesting, and I think I gleaned a lot of comedy out of it.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that. This movie is definitely funny. Yeah, it's got some real moments of like ridiculousness that sort of offset and enhance even like the other more intense moments. So Oscar Isaac's actually quite funny.
It's great. I mean,
he's really great.
His interaction, I've already told you this, but it reminded me the way he intimidates Caleb, which is so funny because he's so much shorter than Domhnall Gleeson. But the way he intimidates Caleb is very similar to the first act of Inglourious Bastards, where Christoph Waltz's character Hans Landa is intimidating this milk farmer who he's visiting and searching for hidden Jews, and it's kind of this. He's being polite on the surface, but there's a menace and a malice underneath all of that. That's really hilarious. That's kind of communicated through the eyes and the way when Nathan talks to Caleb, he'll ask Caleb a question. Caleb will answer kind of meekly, and then Nathan will just say, "That's right, Caleb. Yes, that is right, Caleb." And it's this really condescending way of talking to somebody that is clearly kind of telling Caleb subconsciously that this is my house.
Oh yeah,
and
a power move.
You're my guest.
Yeah, no, he's full of power moves. Like the first one is he hands Caleb a key card to like access different rooms, and is like, I'm just gonna make this really easy for you. If you put it in front of a door and it opens for you, you're allowed to go in. If it doesn't, it's not for you. Like he makes it sound so gracious, but what he's saying in those gracious words is things here, some things are off limits. Don't fucking go in there. Like it definitely feeds into the story, which is he's a man who creates life, right? Or thinks he is. And anyone who would want to create artificial intelligence might just have a little bit of that madness inside of them, I imagine.
Mad scientist. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
But the other dynamic and relationship that fuels the film is the one between Caleb and Ava, where he's talking to Ava and kind of feeling her out and trying to determine whether she's how convincing she is as a living being. And I wanted to quote, I interviewed Mr. Alex Garland about Ava, the visual creation of Ava, which is just stunning. Really, really crazy. And I'm going to read you a little quote from that interview. It was a roundtable interview, and someone asked him, what's sexy to you about the uncanny valley? I don't really know what was the thought behind that question, but that was the question nonetheless. And Garland's reply was, you inadvertently flesh it. The uncanny valley in this movie is, for me, something that's exhibited within Ava, specifically in her movement. The way Ava moves is not robotic. It's like a too perfect version of how humans move. And in the perfection of those movements, it feels a bit other. It's quite hard to say why. It just feels a bit off. The reason I'm saying you're inadvertently flattering me is that it had nothing to do with me at all. It was something Alicia Vikander arrived with. She was a ballerina since the age of 11, and she's got incredible control of her physicality. The uncanny valley was brought here by Alicia as a way to approach playing this robot. And as soon as she said that she was going to do this, I thought, this is absolutely brilliant. And I must agree with Mr. Alex Garland. I think it was a brilliant performance by Miss Vikander.
Speaking of uncanny valleys, which if you don't know, the aspect or like way a robot acts that makes you feel a little bit weird, like a little off, like it's almost too human. And I'd say, like, if I had to pinpoint it, one of the things that she would do is, do you remember, like, sometimes when she's talking or not talking, when she's reacting, and she does react to things that Caleb will say, she has, like, a slight smile that would kind of play up on her lips. Like, she sort of smiles suddenly as if she just thought of something that she thought was, like, nice.
Right.
But it's sort of mechanical. It's slightly calculated. Like, she thought, or, like, as a robot, she knows that that's a way to, like, seem warm and like engaging, and it totally works though, because she is actually warm and engaging feeling.
Yeah, like there's the absence of those kind of human tics, like when you have an achy back, or like she doesn't appear to have any aches and pains because she doesn't. So it's like she's like, she moves a little too gracefully, so it feels a little weird. But we should get into, there are a lot of themes running underneath this movie like a few of them which are really profound and kind of crazy. The main one, I think, that I discovered while I was talking to Mr. Garland, was that his views on artificial intelligence. So most people are afraid of sentient AI, like the iRobot kind, but he actually thinks it's the next step in evolution of human beings in a way. He thinks that once we can create something that's like Ava, where they are by all means living things because they're sentient, and they are not immortal because they need power to live, they will be, it's like they're an improvement on us. And they will outlast us. Not necessarily, he doesn't think they're going to kill us all, but he thinks they're going to outlast us on planet Earth and in the universe. And he thinks perhaps that our creation, these robots, will be our successors. And I think he conveys that message at the end of this movie really in a really interesting way.
Yeah. I mean, I get a little ruffled thinking about that future. I mean, in the sense that it means that I no longer exist. So I guess there is
Yeah.
that's what the uncomfort
It's a bit of a bummer.
comes to. But yeah, a little bit. But otherwise, I can see that. I mean, if we create a robot that's not organic in the way that we are, and thus like able to be exterminated by some thing or other, sure they could live past us, but I'm hoping that they would also sort of carry on a piece of humanity because we're the ones that created them, so they only know us to like be
Well, they're
based
very
off
much like
of.
us in many ways, right? Like they
They have to
Ava.
be. What else could
Yeah.
we create? They have to be like us. We don't know any other kind of way to be.
Yeah, so I mean
Yeah.
that's one of the most interesting themes of the movie. Another one is about gender and what gender really means, because like Ava looks like a girl, so we call her she, but she's not a she. It feels weird to call her he because she looks like a girl, and it feels weird to call her it because she behaves like a human being. So he's questioning whether gender exists within the mind or whether it's a biological thing or not. I don't think he provides an answer to that, which is the way he wanted it. But I think that's a fascinating one as well. Did you find that kind of thought provoking?
Yeah, gender and sexuality. Like
Yeah.
he asks Caleb questions about the way, do you think Ava's flirting with you? Like, which means that he programmed her, or she adapted to learn how to do that, which flirtation is it's a sexual thing that you do to gain someone's attention. It's a subconscious thing almost sometimes, depending on like body movements and things like that. And the fact that can be learned, and I mean, obviously I think it is learned, but like a robot could use that for manipulation or for whatever other reason. Because I mean, a robot doesn't need to procreate or something, like doesn't have some sort of like evolutionary reason. I mean, therein, I guess, is what you could say is a failing of ours and a strength of theirs, is that they're not hindered by those things. They're not influenced by those aspects of humanity, but we are, and they could use them against us. But yeah, I'm not saying that she does or anything, but it's just crazy.
And what's really cool about Ava too as a robot creation in movies is that she's capable of, kind of like Haley Joel Osment in AI. She has the capacity for emotion, for feeling things, and I think that was really, especially you see that in the last shots of the film. Which
does she though? I mean, like that's the whole question, right? Is she actually feeling, or is she like
I think so.
mimicking?
I mean, it would be a spoiler to say explain.
Of course.
It would be so I'm not going to explain. I mean, I'll explain to you after we're off the air. But
no, that's the question, right? Of any kind of movie like this, where are they actually feeling? Like I think in our last talk you mentioned, like if you hit her with a car, would you feel bad about it? Mm-hmm. Because like, does she care? Like
she doesn't feel pain.
She doesn't feel pain. I guess she has a sense of, that's the whole thing, is a sense of just wanting to like preserve herself, I guess.
Well, I will say this: there's one of the last shots in the movie. We see Ava, and she's not around anybody, and she has a look of wonder and happiness on her face, which would not make sense for her to have if there weren't any humans around, if she wasn't feeling emotion.
Right.
So I think that in that shot and in a couple more, I think it was really fascinating to me because I was like, oh shit, I think there, for me personally, I guess it just verified that she does feel things, and she was yearning for something.
Do you think it's telling that she's female and they're male? I think that's interesting. I mean, if you could maybe interpret this film, if you wanted to, as a like commentary on sex being the downfall of men. Which, hey, that's something we see all the time. We just talked about Game of Thrones recently, and hey, there happens all the time there.
Yeah, and another interesting thing was Nathan. I think the way he intimidates Caleb, I think, and we talked about this last time, I think it's kind of an intimidation game he's playing. Where he's kind of orchestrating this whole situation, this relationship between Caleb and Ava. I think he's pulling all of the strings up into a point. I know at the end it perhaps doesn't go the way he expected it to go, but to a point, I think I don't know, like the way we see Nathan acting through most of the film, I don't know whether that's his real personality. I actually don't think it is. I think he was trying to manipulate Caleb into doing certain things, and that really got to me and really made Oscar Isaac's performance that much more impressive as well.
I mean, that's one of the best parts, right? Is not understanding someone's motivations. I mean, the Joker is one of the best villains because you're like, why does he do all this stuff? Like the chaotic person is more interesting and intriguing and like crazy to watch. So I enjoy that part of his character.
Yeah, he's like 10 steps ahead of all of us. A very fascinating character. But anyways, we should wrap this up. I will confirm here that I think Ex Machina is my favorite movie of the year so far. It's wonderful sci-fi, and I recommend it to everybody. Thank you guys so much for joining us on the show. And before we leave you, Ananda, where can we find you on Twitter?
You can find me at Ananda Writes.
And you can find me on Twitter at BJ_Boo. You can find Way Too Indie on Twitter at Way Too Indie. Find us on Facebook and give us a like. Find this podcast on Stitcher Radio and iTunes, where you can subscribe to the podcast and get it every week. And you can give us a rating and a review on there too. We'd very much appreciate that. You can fucking find us on Spotify and Instagram as well. We're everywhere. Oh, and YouTube. Find us on YouTube. We're doing way more stuff there. We just recorded a Game of Thrones season premiere reaction video. We're going to be doing a lot more of those. So lots of stuff going on the site. I've got my Ex Machina review and interview going up this week. Ananda's got tons of Tribeca stuff coming out very soon. So keep an eye out for that stuff. And we'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you, Ryan. You were awesome.
Yes, Ryan's the best.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.